Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 12th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're delighted to be joined today by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. And we're on that key subject of Britain's continued defence unification with the European Union. We've warned about this for a number of years. We're continuing to warn, but the process is speeding up, Mike.
Well, they're coming out, perhaps is the right phrase, but EU military unification, this is the UK's plans to keep contributing to European Union defence operations. They're going to agree joint foreign policy positions. This is a paper which is going to be released later on today. It hadn't been released just before we came on air. And it's going to offer a deep security partnership against terrorism, cybercrime and illegal immigration is what's going to be in the paper. It also promises cooperation on sanctions on other states. And it'll say that the government is seeking a new partnership that goes beyond the existing bilateral arrangements. So we've got bilateral arrangements with the French, we've got bilateral arrangements with various other countries within the European Union. But what we seem to be seeing now is the first hint of acknowledgement from government that these bilateral arrangements are leading to something bigger. So this morning, Michael Fallon, sorry, I nearly forgot his name there, how could I, the Minister for War, was on the Radio 4 Today programme, and he was responding to comments that had been made by Guy Verhofstadt, who's the former Belgian Prime Minister and is the Brexit spokesman for the European Parliament. And he was accusing the UK of blackmailing the European Union by making security cooperation, by making a trade agreement a condition of security cooperation. And so Michael Fallon said, we're not making threats. We've made it clear since Article 50 letter that this new partnership has to be both economic and security cooperation. And here are the details we're proposing today to show the rest of Europe how this will work. I think the rest of Europe actually knows already, but this is a bit of a PR exercise for Britain, for the domestic market. This isn't blackmail, he said. This isn't a negotiating strategy. What we're doing, and everyone has asked for this, is to set out how we see the new partnership the day after Brexit, how we see it working. So, David, let's bring you in at this point. Has everyone been asking for this?
No one's asked for this. It's not been in a manifesto. It's not been an issue. It's not been any election issue ever. None of the parties have campaigned on it. It wasn't featured, ironically, as we've said before, that the vote leave wouldn't feature any of these key issues, these key matters of state. Everything that could be done in order to avoid it and keep it under the table has happened. So this is the glaring contradiction, is the currency unification of all the nations in Europe was all done out in the open, but the military unification has all been done effectively in secret behind closed doors. So as you rightly said, we've gone from loss of capability to bilateral agreements. We've now got trilateral agreements, and now we've got this new agreement. And the new agreement, as we've warned, let's use the correct terms of reference for it, is military union. Yep. We are, Britain is going into an arrangement here that is military union. So despite whatever the hijacking of the language from any of these factions are that we're seeing, either our own government or our own media or the EU, whether they use words like, and they imagine all this in hyphen, joint or deep or relationship or partnership or contribute, or any of this sort of things, what it means is we're going into military union. That's it. But they don't want to use those words because obviously the British public will know exactly what that is very quickly, and they'll work it out, and they'll smell a rat, and they'll round on the politicians for not doing their job. And as we've seen for quite some time, most of them have run away from this. So that's the thing, of course, and it will give the EU its single point control. And it will have competence over Parliament, lock, stock, and all of Her Majesty's barrels of everything. That's officer training, procurement, the white heat industry in this country, what's left of it, Rolls-Royce, BAE, Babcock, they're all in the hat now with this, because it will all be rolled into the procurement policy that the EU will control from a single point perspective. So they will have absolute control and autonomy over defence and defence services in the EU zone. This is exactly what Lord Tebbit and I were warning of quite some time ago. So this is the criticality moment. We're at the watershed now, and the government has almost sort of announced it. So the MPs are completely moribund in their offices. They're outside of their offices because this, no military. We're not a nation.
Yep.
If we have no military, then there is no Brexit. There is no chance of Brexit whatsoever.
Okay, David, what are some of the organisations that say they are there to stand up for Britain's national defence? What are those organisations saying about these events?
Well, there's a press release coming out from Veterans for Britain where Julian Thompson and all of their ex-senior officers are saying that, Britain is walking into this, sleepwalking or walking into this arrangement, and there's been no parliamentary oversight. And they're correct in that part. There is no parliamentary oversight whatsoever. Parliament has lost its competence in this area. There is no competence. So DEFCON is moribund. The 1922 Conservative backbenchers are just sitting on their hands. They've lost their competence. They've lost any kind of angle on what's going on. And I'm kind of reassured by that when I spoke to Dr. Julian Lewis of Defence Committee prior to Parliament breaking up before the summer. And he sort of drew breath at the mere mention of military union and sort of said, oh, well, that's a real big one, isn't it? So there's a bit of awareness there, but there isn't really. I don't think Parliament has looked at this at all. They've not talked about it. It's not been in the media. The only way it's been happening is the likes of us and you. And we're really what we need to do now. All of us is we need to really get the lid off this, and we don't have many tools at our disposal to do it. We can use any of our social media, let's try and do a Twitter barrage with this, so we all have a good go at it, or Facebook, or whatever you've got. But we've got to get some sort of traction with this. But for Julian to sort of say that we're walking into it, it's not exactly the case, because we've been walked into it.
Yep.
And the tactic, from what I understand, right at the start, we got a couple of sources in Number 10 that were leaking that were saying that this was the deep Conservative HQ through to May and Fallon's tactic from word go, and Cameron as well to an extent, his period, that they wanted to bargain the military, our military, as the sweetener for the prenuptial of the trade deal. So this isn't a divorce, this is a wedding. This is Catherine of Aragon getting a divorce, and we're going to marry Anne Boleyn. This is not a Henry VIII divorce, this is a Henry VIII wedding. Yep. We're marrying the EU with our military, and our military is the dowry. So there was a bit of blackmail, but frankly, that was an inverse tactic. So Verhofstadt's actually right there, but it was our own dirty tricks brigade that were up to no good.
David, if I can just come in there briefly, there are a couple of people in our chat box saying they don't believe that their own MPs are aware of these events. And I think this is a pretty fair comment. So how is this policy being driven through government? We're not seeing debate on the floor of Westminster about should we be doing this, what the pros and cons are. It's simply policy that's coming into force. How are they bringing these policies in without any form of proper debate?
It's all being done through the back channels, isn't it? It's all being done outside of Parliament in the other avenues that are available to the Treasury and the Bank of England in order to expedite this. We all need to sort of understand that this is a money control orientated policy. Military union will give the EU enough of a breath to underwrite the euro, and I mean all euros issued, not that they're going to issue, all the ones that are existing and going to exist. That 2% to start with of the GDP across the entire EU zone, that includes us, because we're in it now, is an awful lot of money, and that will underwrite the euro temporarily. And with the procurement control that they will be able to flow the monies and the industry and the policy around, and the capital and operating budgets in this area, will be enough to sort of sustain the euro temporarily against all the other pressures. So it's a money orientated thing, and that's dictating policy. So we've got to look at the kind of, it's quite a complex issue, because yes, we've got the MPs are not doing, anything at all. They might as well not be there for all the good they're doing at the moment. The majority of this is obviously coming through the other avenues. in government that we don't see as general public and we don't see in the media. I'm kind of relied on that from what a couple of Trident responsible admirals have sort of said to me in private, that, you know, that there was only one party and the Treasury instructed whoever was in charge of policy of each party that this is what's going to be done and get on with it. So, you know, the party political thing has failed the people. We've got a real variance in terms of what the people want, a notion of democracy, because that's frankly gone. There isn't any, it's only a facade. And really where we're at now with this. But it's just simply not, you know, these MPs are not doing their job. They're locked out of their own system. They're now locked out of parliamentary competence because the instrument, and this was the key thing when I first started this, is a lot of the admirals are saying is the only way of dealing with this is by a motion in Parliament and Parliament debating it and carrying a vote. And thereby then the state had an instrument to deal with it from the correct point, from the correct starting point. And of course, we've not had that. We've had everything other, no debate on it at all. And yet we're talking about the future of not only our military, the nation, but all of our industry. I mean, it's got to be the biggest thing since, you know, I don't know what to compare it to. You know, I mean, it's a huge event.
Well, David, of course, we must mention the fact that the first vote on the so-called Great Repeal Bill was passed last night. And of course, what MPs have done in the process is give away what remaining little power they had, because they've effectively given away the keys to everything to government. But look, we've got to move on, and we'll just mention, you mentioned Defence Select Committee. Well, in parallel with that vote last night, one other event which took place is that a new Defence Select Committee was constituted. Now, I don't even know who's on this yet. We can see an image of them on screen at the moment, but I don't know who all these people are. Now, I realise that this is a newly constituted Defence Committee, and you know, as I say, only formally set up last night. But nonetheless, they seem to be a little confused about their role, because of course, select committees are supposed to hold departments and government to account. They're supposed to ask searching questions about the departments that they're responsible for, on spending, on policy, on administration. But today, the Defence Select Committee their first session was on the F-35, the new Joint Strike Fighter, and whether it's any good or not, and also the procurement process for the F-35. And they thought the best people to have as witnesses for their first meeting was Deborah Haynes and Alexei Mostras from The Times, because The Times newspaper had written some pretty good articles on the F-35, on how much that boondoggle is costing, and the implications for the UK.
And defects.
Absolutely on defects. And so they decided that the first hour of their questioning would be to really, instead of holding government to account, that perhaps it would be much better to hold the Times to account for their coverage of this. And it was pretty tough questioning. And then the following witness, who was a civil servant, I can't remember who it was, the first question they asked him was what did he think of the Times coverage of the F-35? And I have to say, he was reasonably balanced in his answer, because he didn't criticise the Times at all, and he did acknowledge many of the failings that the Times have been highlighting. But I mean, David, what on earth is going on when a Defence Select Committee thinks that their job is to question the media on their coverage of what government's doing, when in fact what their job should be is to question government on what government is doing?
Well, it's not Defcom's job to cross-examine journalists. Journalists just report, and they can report one way or the other or whatever. So, I mean, that's a load of nonsense. This is just, you know, for the opening work of this new season of Defcom to be doing this under the circumstances of what we're just talking about today really does let you know just exactly how ineffectual they are, because they're not scrutinising what they should be scrutinising, and they're not holding to account who they should be holding to account. So they're completely off elsewhere. I mean, it just isn't their job. I mean, well, you know, they'd have been better calling you two for witnesses, wouldn't they? I mean, this is a nonsense. I mean, several years ago, I engaged with Deborah Haynes, and we ended up with some front page stuff in Defence as a result of our conversations. But at the time, she said, well, I don't know anything about military union. What on earth's that? Is that something to do with, and even at the time when we were sort of saying about unification and military union, had no idea, not a clue. But she's obviously the chosen one because, when I went to party conference, she was the one interviewing Mike Fallon and all of the others. So, it's a complete load. It's a complete load of tosh. This lot might as well have just gone round the red line and got lashed up for all the good they did yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, David.
Thanks, David.
We are going to move on now to Syria. And I wanted to highlight this article from Consortium News. Syria's survival is a blow to jihadists. Now, there's an acknowledgement here that the war in Syria, as far as the West is concerned, is lost, that ISIS and the various jihadists have been more or less destroyed. And the article says the fact that Syria has survived what has been thrown at it is the beginning of the end, not just for the political regime change project, but also of the Sunni jihadi project that has been used as a coercive tool for bringing into being a new Middle East. That's according to Alistair Crook, who's former British diplomat, former MI6 official, and that's what he's been writing. And Crook says he criticises he says that it's an obituary for the Bush doctrine, for the neoconservative doctrines of Paul Wolfowitz and people like that. And he credits the Syrian Arab army with breaking the back of the neocon strategy. And he said it's the Syrian Sunnis who fought and died for the Levantine Islamic tradition, of a tolerant, more inwardly oriented, quasi-secular Islam. Now, he then goes on to highlight an article published in an Egyptian newspaper, which was written by the Middle East spokesman, the Middle East minister, Alistair Burt. And he suggests, Burt was suggesting in the Egyptian article that London is now wholeheartedly supporting the Sisi regime in Egypt in its war on the Muslim Brotherhood. And he says that Burt attacked the Muslim Brotherhood for links to extremism, while emphasising that Britain has imposed an outright ban on any contact with the organisation since 2013, adding that now is the time for everyone who defends the Brotherhood in London or Cairo to put an end to this confusion and ambiguity. Now, this is a bit of a shift in policy from the government, it seems, because only a couple of years ago, Burt was publishing articles which were defending the Muslim Brotherhood and attacking Egypt. I was speaking to Vanessa Beeley this morning about this, and she said that for the UK to betray its greatest ally and in fact their own creation, it's not for the greater good. So Crook in this article went on to say that Al Qaeda will sweep up the remnants from both ISIS on one hand and the angry and disillusioned members of the Muslim Brotherhood on the other. And this perhaps gives us a clue as to what's actually going on here. Because why would they do this? Well, of course, both the US and Britain are trying to turn the President Sisi away from his leanings towards Russia and China. Britain then could play the usual card of fomenting chaos if the nicer approach towards Sisi doesn't work. If they can't get him to move away from Russia and China again, they then are pretty much set up with the remnants of ISIS from Iraq and Syria, plus the Muslim Brotherhood, which are pretty much hacked off with Britain for their new policy position. Put them all together, dump them in to Sisi's back door, and let the chaos ensue.
Let the chaos begin. Well, in a minute, we're just going to mention companies indulging in the dark arts to help our view that Al Qaeda is out there and going to be a terrorist problem across the world. So we'll get into some of that dirty stuff in a moment.
Okay. And last week we mentioned Zapad 2017, which is the Russian strategic exercise which is taking place in Belarus, mainly in Belarus. And we mentioned the absolutely hysterical reaction to it. We said that's taking place. It begins on the 14th, which is on Thursday, I suppose. And if you remember, Jens Stoltenberg getting a bit upset. He said this is going back a couple of months because NATO has been trying very hard to get to observe the Zapad exercises. So back in March, he said every nation has the right to exercise its forces as long as it's done within the agreed international obligations and relations. We would welcome an invitation to observe the Zapad exercise. And as we reported last week, that invitation did come, although it was only on particular days, whereas NATO, that's not good enough for them. They wanted, they were saying last week, they wanted to be able to just drop in on anything that was going on and observe and get access to documentation, all kinds of stuff. Well, a couple of articles have appeared over the last day or two about this. Fear and confidence in the face of Russia war games. This is the Washington Times. And they're ramping up the hysteria. They're saying that they're dramatizing the military movements. They're suggesting 100,000 troops involved in this. Defense News also on edge. New Cold War tensions high in Eastern Europe. NATO officials keep on saying that these measures are not a provocation, but a defence reaction to changes in security development. This is, the security environment. This is Russia's rejection of NATO's fear-mongering. But no matter how NATO members verbally camouflage their actions, the fact that the forces and assets of leading NATO countries have appeared where they have, where they've never been before. If NATO countries really are concerned about the unstable situation in the region, then what they need to do is to curtail their own military activities, which are groundless and don't respond to the real security challenges. So Russia really trying to push back on this somewhat. Well, Michael Fallon was on the Andrew Marr show at the weekend. He said that Zapad 2017 is designed to provoke us. It's designed to test our defences, and that's why we have to be strong. Russia is testing us and testing us now at every opportunity. We're seeing a more aggressive Russia. We have to deal with that. And also on the Andrew Marr show on Sunday, Jens Stoltenberg, who said, we've seen before that Russia has used big military exercises to disguise or, as a disguise or a precursor for aggressive military actions against their neighbours. This is supposedly what happened in Georgia and in Crimea. So we call on Russia to be fully transparent. Well, of course, Putin isn't crying about the fact that Rapid Trident 2017 is taking place in Ukraine at the moment. Now, I appreciate that the scale of this is somewhat smaller than Russia's. Russia absolutely denies that they're going to have 100,000 men on.
Well, I would say, what if they are?
Well,
what if they are?
It's their troops.
Yeah.
Rapid Trident's only going to be 2,000 personnel or so. 14 nations: Bulgaria, Canada, Estonia, Italy, Georgia, Lithuania, Moldova, Norway, Poland, Romania, Turkey, Ukraine, UK, and the United States.
Sort of jamboree, isn't it, really?
Well, exactly. They say that that this exercise is focused on peacekeeping and stability operations. But the hysteria over the Russian exercises.
It is hysteria, Mike.
Yes.
I mean, go back to the Cold War days. Huge naval exercises run by NATO, driving right up into the Norwegian Sea. US carrier groups. UK carriers operating as well. We'll call them carrier groups, but vast exercises, and also with troops on mainland Europe. So this is perfectly normal, and there's just a desperation to whip up that there's something very special about this. It's nonsense.
Absolute nonsense. And in the meantime, where else are we whipping up? Well, of course, sanctions over North Korea. Well, in fact, in the United Nations, the US Security Council resolution was voted on and got a unanimous vote, including China and Russia. Matthew Rycroft, hysterical as usual. He is, of course, is the UK's permanent representative to the Security Council. He had this to say: "We've made it clear we will not stand idly by in the face of such aggression." Of course, talking about North Korea's nuclear program. He said, there is a way out. Diplomacy can end this crisis, but first North Korea must change its reckless course. So we've got preconditions on any kind of diplomatic solution. Yeah. Russia doesn't quite hold the same opinion. Rycroft said, make no mistake, we're tightening the screw.
So these are the threats coming in.
Absolutely.
Here. Yeah.
We're tightening the screw and we stand ready to tighten it further. And he said that unanimous agreement yesterday of the states around this table is a powerful step. Now, Boris Johnson, of course, had to make a statement as well. He said that he welcomes the unanimous adoption of the resolution yesterday. The international community has shown it is united against the illegal and reckless acts by the North Korean regime. He said the resolution will curtail gas, petrol and oil imports. It will ban all textile exports, taking hundreds of millions of dollars from the export revenues that the North Korean regime uses to fund its illegal nuclear and ballistic missile programs. And it will end the exploitation of North Korean laborers abroad. The North Korean regime bears full responsibility for the measures that the UN Security Council has enacted today. It is their continued illegal and aggressive actions that have brought us to this point, and it is North Korea that must change its course. So North Korea must change its course.
I was trying to think of the sort of the wars that North Korea has started in relatively recent years. Are we looking at areas of the globe that North Korea has been stirring up? I mean, we can label the West with Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and more.
No, North Korea hasn't done anything as far as I know.
This is probably the problem. And the banking industry, of course.
Yes. Okay, now, over the years, the last couple of years, we've been highlighting what's been going on with the cities agenda, and particularly the implications that has for nation states and democratic nation states. C40 Cities is one of the main sort of think tanks or pressure groups that's pushing this forward. They're running an event in a few days' time, how mayors are getting the job done, and I just thought the title was really highlighting how cities are just going ahead. Never mind the democratic process in the countries that they inhabit. These city-states are being established as almost independent entities with their own independent governance structures. And so this is going to, they say the first edition of this new C40 event series, C40 Talks, How Mayors Are Getting the Job Done, will take place in New York Times Building Conference Center on the 18th of September, which is kicking off Climate Week. The event will be open to selected members of the press, Brian, and will bring together 100 notable guests, including global mayors, business leaders, influencers, and internationally renowned climate experts, journalists, to explore how cities are setting the agenda for a better tomorrow. They've got two main sessions. One's called The Air We Breathe. The other's called The Future We Want. And right. So the question is, who's we?
We.
And
Well, this is a very interesting subject. So if we have a look at how we can see power being misplaced or mishandled, we can pick up on this Guardian article. Thank you very much, the person who alerted us to this one. So here's the headline: London could get 50 million armed police base to tackle terrorism. So this terrorist bit is key to so much that's happening in UK and overseas at the moment. What do they say? Well, a new base for police officers in London, one of a series of measures being proposed to protect the public from terrorist attacks. So the soft cell, it's all to look after us. And this is going to be in the Limehouse area in the east of the capital. It's going to house about 200 officers and contain its own firing range, weapons storage and other facilities. And the text goes on to say that this is vital to ensure that the police can be fully trained and there to protect us. This was the bit that interests me. It says details of the plans have been submitted by the Metropolitan Police to the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime, MOPAC. So this is not something to do with armed police that's debated in Parliament. It's simply pushed into the Mayor of London's office for somebody to say, yep, I think this is a great idea. Let's get more armed police in London. So where do we go? Well, we go to this lady, the Deputy Mayor of London, and Susie. We'll come on to her in a bit more detail in a moment. And if you go and have a look at the Mayor's website, you'll see that she is the lady with all of the experience to look at the police policy. She's going to evaluate this latest one. And she essentially gets powers delegated. The Mayor himself gets the power initially. He's delegated it to her as Deputy Mayor. And what it means effectively is that she has the same powers as a police and crime commissioner in other areas of the country. So this woman is going to make the decision. And what do we know about her? Well, she spent quite a lot of time working in government. She was advisor to Blunkett. And when we looked at the details on the mayor's website, it says that she's also worked in the voluntary sector as campaigns and policy manager for campaigning to end to child poverty. They're always involved with children and looking after the welfare of children. But it said she's also been in the private sector as a director of public affairs. And I'll just highlight that because I thought how interesting that it doesn't give any more details. So we went to have a quick look. And what do we come up with? Well, we note here that this was the bit that she was acting with the public affairs, and it was director of Bell Pottinger Public Affairs. Now, it's interesting here, she calls herself a director from 2006, 2008, but she's only part-time. But this is the public affairs section of Bell Pottinger, which is itself a public affairs and reputation management agency.
So this is the reputation management department for the reputation management agency?
Yeah, so I think you would put some pretty key people in there, because if you're in amongst some pretty dirty stuff anyway as a company, you're going to want to be sure that the people who manage your reputation are fully in the picture. So this is where it gets interesting, because although it's only 2 years, why are we interested in Bell Pottinger? Well, if we go back to reports in 2006, this is The Guardian pointing up that Bell Pottinger was involved in matters going on around Litvinenko. So this was the Russian who was poisoned. It was blamed on the KGB. Of course, Putin's name was supposedly connected with this. And Bell Pottinger was in amongst some very, very dirty stuff where people were being murdered. I'm not suggesting that was a result of Bell Pottinger, but certainly they're handling reporting around this issue. We can go on. We've got another report here. This is about Thatcher, and it's saying that Thatcher's PR guru has been involved in manipulating propaganda in Iraq. And this is where the story gets particularly interesting, because Bell Pottinger had a cool $500 million from the US in order to create fictitious propaganda, supposedly for Al-Qaeda. And the objective was to leave this stuff around, supposedly spoiling Al-Qaeda's reputation. But of course, nobody knew whether this was real or false propaganda. And it went on. This is into the present day. So we got Bell Pottinger being accused of inciting racial hatred in South Africa. And that's now taken a fairly serious turn, because the headline from the BBC is it going to result in collapse? And you were able to pull this one out, Mike. So the Mail getting right into it, saying that it's going to go into administration tomorrow.
So that was on Sunday. That was
published. Sunday, right? Okay.
They were expecting it to go into administration yesterday. In fact, the latest is that it's going to go into administration today. But Bell Pottinger has divested itself of about half its company so far. Part of it's gone off and to be rebranded in the Far East, and there's another section of it hoping to divest itself, to split away today before this administration process begins. So 270 jobs on the line. But what's clear from mainstream media in the past is that this organisation is more than just about PR and reputation management. It's about making news stories and actually producing the news. It's a real, what appears to be the case is that it's a real 1984 type organisation where we create monsters for people to be scared of.
Indeed, and $500 million US paid in order for this company to help create false terrorist propaganda. So if we put the pieces together, we've got the situation where the Met Police are saying, well, we've got this amazing terrorist threat. Some of it's based on Al-Qaeda, of course, some of it based on ISIS. This is the lady who's now going to say whether we're going to get more armed police as a result. She was working for a company that was helping to create false terrorist propaganda. Now, we're not saying, of course, that she was directly involved. We want to ask a question, and that is that did the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, was she actually aware of the activities of her company, Bell Pottinger, in creating this false terrorist propaganda? We could ask another question: is that false terrorist propaganda now being used as the excuse to say we've got to have more armed police on the streets? Well, we haven't got answers on this, but I do find it interesting that she did not want to declare on the Mayor of London website that the company she worked for was Bell Pottinger. I wonder why she'd be so sensitive, Mike. Well, we leave people to think that through, and I'll also add that, of course, EU military unification automatically means further unification with the police in their anti-terrorist role. So there's some fairly serious things building in the background. Now, we'll end today with an update on Melanie Shaw. Many people have been asking over the last few weeks what's happened to Melanie. We were aware of some things we could not report at the time. Very often we have to wait for a little bit of water to go under the bridge before we can say what we know is happening and has been happening. But let's just do a recap for anybody who doesn't know. Melanie Shaw was the very brave whistleblower that blew the lid on the abuse of children at Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham. As a result of that action, and particularly because she was one of many abuse survivors who were talking about the involvement of British politicians in the abuse of children, Melanie was pretty quickly picked up and put in prison. She had a particularly rough time in HM Prison Peterborough. She was subsequently released, but fairly shortly after a trial where there was no public attendance or press attendance, she was put back into prison. She went into HM Prison Foston Hall, and we said a little while ago, a few weeks ago, that she's been moved through to Eastwood Park, which is in Fowlfield, Wootton under Edge, Gloucestershire. Now, remember, the lady responsible for the imprisonment of Melanie Shaw is Theresa May, the British Prime Minister. She was in her role as Home Secretary when Melanie was first imprisoned. But of course, Theresa May, as Prime Minister, has done absolutely nothing to protect this very vulnerable lady. On the contrary, it appears that Theresa May is desperate to protect her Conservative Party colleagues, who are now very nervous at the deepening investigations into child abuse by British politicians, including Ted Heath. So what can we say about Melanie? Well, when she was in Foston Hall, she wrote several letters in which she was saying that the prison was out of control. There was constant lockdown. She had spent virtually a year in solitary confinement. But in this letter, she was talking about alarms going off, officers losing control, women smoking joints quite openly in front of the prison. And her description was a very dangerous environment where things were out of control. Well, she's been moved under very strange circumstances. She was moved across to the the Fowlfield prison. And the interesting thing about this is that the governor, a lady called Susan Diamond White, a little while ago called for the government to give longer jail sentences to help offenders who'd been abused. I hope you understand this.
I have to say I don't.
Well, the logic is that those soft judges have been giving child abuse victims short sentences, and she says, well, the problem with that is while they're in prison, we can't help them. We can't help them with their psychological needs. We can't help them if they're on drugs because we haven't got time. So what we need are longer sentences so that we can help these very vulnerable child abuse or sexual abuse victims. And as she said here in the quote, it's impossible for inmates to be rehabilitated in a few short weeks. Now, if you're wondering whether this is reality, yes, this is absolute reality. The BBC reported her words, and it's been reported in other places. So what sort of treatment has Melanie been receiving under this wonderful regime by Ms. Diamond White. Well, she's been kept in solitary again. She's been denied access to the Samaritans. Melanie says this is standard procedure, that there's a phone so that prisoners in any prison can call the Samaritans, but not for Melanie Shaw. She's been denied basic toiletries. She's escorted by 3 warders. They can be male and female, and they escort her at all times, including for showers and the toilet. For the shower and the toilet, the door's left open. So Melanie is being subjected to abuse, of course, because very often those warders are male. She's been denied books. She's denied any form of therapeutic work such as art. She's not getting all of her telephone calls. Letters are being intercepted. They've also refused her the opportunity to earn money to pay for small essentials and luxuries. And she's been branded as a dangerous, violent, mentally ill inmate. And she is told that each day is Wednesday, and if you ask the time, it is always 10 to 2. So if we have a look at what's actually going on, Melanie is being held in what is supposedly a more open facility that has mental health facilities to assist prisoners, but actually the treatment there is now more sinister and brutal than when she was in a higher security prison. And we have a prison governor who thinks that you help child and sex abuse victims by giving them a longer sentence.
So every day of the week is Wednesday, every minute of the day is 10 to 2.
If they ask, what day is it, they're always told it's Wednesday. And if you ask what is the time, they're always told it's 10 to 2.
This is how you imagine Soviet style
psychological torture.
Absolutely.
And this is all under the direct responsibility of Theresa May, the Conservative Party Prime Minister of Britain. This is the very same Theresa May, of course, that's standing on a world stage and telling North Korea how to behave, or how the Russians should be behaving, or how the Chinese should be behaving. And remember that it is her party, the Conservative Party, that Tim Fortescue, the whip under the Thatcher, under the Ted Heath regime, was saying that politicians were coming to the whips and needing help. They'd perhaps been involved in little boys. So there's no misunderstanding here. It's quite clear that the Conservative Party has been involved with the abuse of children, is involved with the abuse of children, and they're prepared to lock abuse survivors up in prison in order to protect their reputation. Wonderful stuff. Welcome to Democracy UK 2017 style. Well, we just end on the note that several of the mainstream papers getting very excited that there may be a bit of a storm tonight. So if you haven't picked up on this, just remember that it may be a little bit windy. Apparently the country may be devastated, or probably not. We couldn't make it up, Mike, could we really? We don't, of course. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you're not already a subscriber for UK Column, please sign up. We need your financial help to keep going. If you can make a donation, that is much appreciated. But here we are reporting the most accurate news we can. We can only do it with your ongoing financial support. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.